Hello and welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Hopefully, everybody out there is having a lovely Thanksgiving. If you're in the US, of course, because some countries that have Thanksgiving, they don't have Thanksgiving on the same day. And, if you're in a country that doesn't have Thanksgiving, well, it sucks because, turkey is lovely and you should just have a reason to have more turkey, right?
Any excuse to stuff ourselves, right?
I mean, or tofurkey. You could tofurkey, you could turducken, you could ham. I mean, however you do Thanksgiving, right?
You can also go very unconventional. There are some wild ways to do Thanksgiving these days.
Now, speaking of that, are you team green bean or not?
There are way worse things than a green bean casserole. So
Oh, no. Oh,
I
that's a
I
that's a
probably
whole separate question. Green bean casserole, yes or no?
probably okay, but not top of the
Really?
list.
Really? Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. I am very anti green bean casserole. I think it's truly, truly dreadful.
Okay.
Um, I there's always been this family debate because one side of the family is team green bean casserole, and the
hmm
other side is very anti. And I fall firmly on the anti side.
See, the problem is anything that's not turkey and mashed potatoes is kind of getting in the way of turkey and mashed potatoes. So
It's true.
the rest of that debate is mostly fruitless because I want turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy.
This year we are trying a turducken, and
Okay.
this episode is being filmed before said turducken
hmm
is going in the oven, but you will all be listening to it and watching it after the turducken has
We'll
emerged.
assume the best.
So, I am a little nervous about that though, because that is a whole lot of meats.
hmm hmm
And if anybody doesn't know what a turducken is, it's a duck that has been deboned and jammed inside a chicken that has been deboned and jammed inside the turkey. So three birds in one.
hmm
No room for stuffing because it's just meat on meat on meat.
Yeah, stuffing's aside at that point.
Yeah, like any good American holiday, it's meat on meat on meat. Um,
Right.
they could have stuffed some smaller birds inside. I have seen things going all the way down to like a partridge. So like you do the quail, and you do that, and just
hmm
it's a
That on
Russian
TikTok
nesting
is
doll.
that where you've seen those things?
I have seen them. No, I've seen them on a cooking blog, like the
Okay.
ultimate Russian nesting doll bird extravaganza palooza.
To each their own, I guess.
Um, we have wandered off of cars though.
Well, we are in a season of change, right? It feels like here in the Northwest, we basically skipped fall and we are already in winter, even though we're not quite there yet. Um, but there are some things on the wave here for vehicles, specifically electric vehicles,
Mhm.
with a political change, and there are some big questions. And the first one that I wanted to ask you is, what are your thoughts on how quickly we are about to lose a federal tax credit and how much that's going to affect kind of the auto industry and a lot of the plans that have been set in place.
Yeah, I am curious to see if it lasts. I'm cautiously optimistic that cooler heads will prevail and at least have a slower ramp down if it is going to end. I guess we should just rip the band-aid off, right? It's elections are
hmm
consequential, and there
hmm
has been a lot of discussion around the politicization of EVs and
hmm
how one party seems to really not like them when it used to be a sort of a nothing burger. I mean, both parties were kind of just fine with the EVs. There were government incentives. George W. spent a ton of money pushing electrification because of energy independence, etc. And have you noticed that no one's talked about energy independence in I don't know, a long time?
I have not heard that specific phrasing in quite a while. Yeah.
Since you were like 5 years old.
Sure, give or take.
Um, for those that are not familiar, the whole logic and the reason that George W., well known liberal, right? George W. Bush, the
Yeah,
reason that he was
famously.
so into EVs was that if you are driving an electric car, chances are 99% of that electricity, however it came about, was generated in the United States. And if not the United States, real close. because we do get
Right.
a lot of energy from Canada, and some energy from Mexico. Energy kind of goes backwards and forwards there, but there's no undersea cable to Saudi Arabia. There's no undersea cable to Russia.
Not
So
yet.
yeah, not yet. You never know. Uh, no undersea electrical cable. Lots of undersea
Sure. Yeah,
cables.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But if you're driving your EV and there's another oil embargo, yeah, it's going to raise the price of energy in the United States because of natural gas prices, et cetera. But it is much less flexible of a price demand curve than oil into a gas tank. So it's another reason logically to actually be totally okay with EVs and plug-in hybrids, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, any rate, back on the tax credit, though. I don't know. What are your odds? What do you think?
Well, I mean, so here there's a couple pieces, right? And we're just speaking to the general politics of it, not trying to make it political, if that's possible.
Not
There's
possible.
some well, you know what I mean though, right? Is that we're just looking at the issue, and the issue is will this be there? Will this not? What effect is
Mhm.
this going to have on the auto industry? And some news this morning said there are some concerns about tariffs being applied basically across the board, which is definitely going to affect a lot of our not just our manufacturing costs and our wholesale goods, but everything coming into this country is looking like it might get tariffed, and that's going to change a lot of costs, including that of gasoline. So if we're looking at
Mhm.
potentially higher gasoline costs, even talk about energy independence. If we're trying to say, hey, here's what we're going to do to make to bring these things into America, then Americans are going to have to pay for it, and that's where things are going to
Mhm.
get a little bit sticky. So, do I think the tax credit's going to stand? No, I do not, and I am always open to being wrong, and this is one of those where I'd like to be wrong. One of the confusing pieces here is that there's currently a commission. There's an exercise about governmental efficiency,
Mhm.
and there are some people involved in this Department of Government Efficiency program who have vested interests in electric vehicles, and I'm curious to see how quickly or vocally support for getting rid of this tax credit comes in from said parties, because as we've talked about before, and on our EV Buyer's Guide channel, we have videos talking about what cars actually do qualify for that tax credit, and
Mhm.
that window is getting smaller and smaller. Not only are vehicle manufacturers needing to make a lot of transitions to be eligible, but there's a lot of cost that goes into it. So the list is a lot smaller this year than it was a year ago, and it's set to become even smaller in 2025. And it turns out that one of the largest electric vehicle manufacturers in the world does qualify for these tax credits. So getting rid of it would actually be almost a
Mhm.
direct harm to that specific company, which put things in a very interesting space. So that's what I'm most curious about. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to last. If there's a ramp down period, I think that would be the win that I would take at this point.
Yeah, and we should probably pick this apart a tiny bit because uh, I think it is arguable that the winner of deleting the tax credit will ultimately be China. Because
Mm,
one of the reasons that Tesla, kind of liked the elimination of the tax credit last time or was not that offended by it was because they have a lot of production capability in China, and
oh
they
yeah.
were they were bringing in large battery pack shipments from China for their base models. We have to step back from that one a little bit further and talk about the natural result of the tax credit in the United States. We
Hmm.
were just taking a look at the Ionic 9. The Ionic 9 is going to be built in Georgia. And why is it built in Georgia, not South Korea, where Hyundai and Kia build a ton of other things, and where it would logically make more sense to build lower volume products in one factory for the whole world? It's
Hmm.
because of the tax credit. So this hope to get the $7,500 credit is the reason that for the first time in a long time, we've seen an increase in domestic auto manufacturing, not just from the big three, but from Hyundai spending literally nearly $13 billion building a huge, huge factory in Georgia. And lots of other manufacturers have similar plans, but those are really going to be put in danger by the elimination of the tax credit.
Yeah, and if we look at the country as a giant landlord, right? Because you're
Mhm.
getting space in that country, that's a huge investment from the Korean companies to come over here, and then all of a sudden things change and make it not at
Yeah.
all feasible or reasonable for them to have made that move. That's going to be not good for American manufacturing jobs, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's my take on it because
Yeah.
if I was looking at those books and I said, "Hey, it costs us less money to shut this thing down right now, no matter how much money we put into it, all the infrastructure that we're building, shut it down and ship it out," that's just going to hurt our own job. So I'm
Yep.
curious to see how it all plays out. Again, there's a lot of moving pieces here. Nothing's going to be done until we get into 2025.
Mhm.
But there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of those moving pieces, and I'm curious to see the effect it's going to have. It's We're probably moving in a very different direction overall, and that
Yeah.
kind of leads me to my other thought, which is, we've heard in the news the last couple of days, and even before that, there's been kind of a shift away from a pure EV vehicle strategy, and I think the latest one came from Porsche, where they said, "Listen, we're gonna keep moving towards EVs, but we're also going to put some more money back into development of hybrids and
Mhm.
internal combustion." They're not the only ones who have done this. We saw General Motors make a big shift to go into their Ultium platform, which we're not calling Ultium anymore. We're just going to ship away from that name, which seems unusual. But
It's
point
GM.
being, yeah, they said we're gonna go for hybrids and plug-in hybrids, but they currently don't have any on the market right now. So the question is,
Mhm.
what does that vehicle landscape look like? I mean, again, this is, I think, a lot of it politically motivated. Obviously, they're looking at sales numbers and where they thought things would continue to have a meteoric rise. It's not to say they're falling, because they're not, but we're just not seeing that rapid increase in adoption rate.
Yep.
There's a lot of things on the horizon here.
Yep. And I mean, there's valid concern about the cost of the tax credits on the federal purse, right? How much did the
Mhm.
tax credits cost? The answer seems to be a lot less than previously because fewer and fewer vehicles qualify. But that was also part of this intention of this policy was to promote American manufacturing. You have to build the EV in the US to qualify for the tax credit, hence Hyundai's mission to build a huge factory in Georgia.
Mhm.
You also have to build the battery in North America, and the battery can't contain critical minerals from China or Russia or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I am curious to see how this affects total sales because I will say I am not a fan of the blanket tariffs on everything from China because I think that's just bonkers stupid. That's going to raise costs for everybody and it's going to disproportionately affect lower income earners because they're much more likely to be buying statistically seemingly uh goods from China, from Walmart, et cetera, that kind of thing. So the
The more
large
affordable
volumes of
goods to begin with.
right, more
Yeah.
affordable goods tend to be there because the cost of labor is lower, yada yada yada. But I think that instead of having a $7,500 tax credit on North American made EVs, it could simply be that we have a really, huge tariff on EVs that contain content from China. You could effectively have a similar result, maybe.
Mhm.
That tax credit question is interesting because according to Automotive News, I'm not sure about the source of their data at this point in time. Hopefully, people will let us know. But they implied that for some reason, for consumers, the eligibility of the tax credit was a greater motivating factor than simply price. So
Mm.
even though effectively the price of the vehicle was the same for them, they gravitated towards the one with the tax credit. I am curious to see why. Is this a domestic content? Is that well known and people know
Mhm.
why, a Blazer gets the tax credit, but X doesn't? Is that
Mhm.
the reason they're gravitating towards the vehicle with the tax credit? Or is it simply the sale? I want that because it's the deal.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it was so, national focus of, these are the parts, these are the manufacturing, these are the materials. Um, I would guess it's more about the deal. And we've this tax credit. Obviously, there were changes in 2024, but it by and large affects those with higher incomes much greater than it affects those with lower incomes.
Mhm.
And I think A lot of that has to do with if you have this tax liability at the end of the year, you're doing what you can, and you know the trick tips and
Yeah.
tricks to get that liability taken care of or covered. And so, if you can get the vehicle effectively the same price, in theory, you're also getting more for less. You know, if I'm getting a $50,000 car for $40,000, or I'm buying a $40,000 car, then in theory, that $50,000 car is better. So I think that
Mhm.
probably plays into it. But I think we like a deal. So saying this comes with the credit is certainly a motivating factor to get things out the door. I mean, that's why we have incredible lease rates every once in a while. You just see, you know, you can get this vehicle for just a few $100s a month. We're seeing that a lot on EVs right now as well.
Right.
It's a big reason to jump in because it just seems so affordable, and that's what people like.
And there is some uncertainty around whether corporate tax credits would continue or not continue,
Hmm.
so that could affect leasing because that's effectively a
Hmm.
corporate purchase. Lots of uncertainty around this. It does seem like we don't really have good data on the effect of tax credits and MSRP directly. We do see that manufacturers like Ford, where they don't qualify for the full credit on the Mach E, they have seemingly been aggressive in repricing and keeping the price constant. Also, Hyundai and Kia have done similar things, although they don't have that problem anymore because they're moving to. Well, they have a new problem because they're moving to Georgia. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of uncertainty around that, and we just don't know how it's going to go. But we would love to hear from all of you. Do you think this is a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Should we be doing this as a society? Lots of other countries have all manner of green incentives. Is it simpler to have other incentives like free registration? That's what
Mhm.
happens in some areas around the world. The U.S. is relatively unique in that, by and large, car registration is either just a regular flat fee that doesn't go up over time, or in some states like California, the bulk of what you pay every year is simply a personal property tax. The actual cost for having that car registered and around is a very small part of it. Most of your bill is simply personal property tax, just like your house or whatever. And that just devalues over time. So eventually you're going to pay, very little for your car's registration. But in some municipalities around the world, it's based on emissions. And the more
Mhm.
polluting your car is, the more it costs you to keep around. The older your car is, the more it costs you to keep around because newer cars are cleaner and better for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, here in Washington, it's a very different situation. You pay a percentage of the vehicle's value, which is a predetermined value, not necessarily based on the market at all, which
Mhm.
can be a little
Yep.
bit frustrating for folks. And then if you buy an EV, you pay essentially a penalty, and that's because you are not paying into the road tax, which is handled through
Mhm.
gasoline sales.
Yep.
So on the surface, it seems like you're paying a penalty to own an EV, and even if the numbers flush out at the end, people don't like paying more if they don't have to, or and if they feel like they're paying more, that's certainly kind of a knock against. But trust me, having paid for really inexpensive electricity, they could charge me just about whatever they want for the registration, and it would
Yeah.
still be a better deal for me. So this is one of those things.
It is, that's kind of an interesting point because it is tax policy wise, it is an interesting sort of gimme in a way that electric vehicle owners don't pay road tax in the same way. So you're
Yeah.
driving your regular car down the road, the less efficient your car is, generally that correlates not directly, but there's a correlation to vehicle weight. So you drive a bigger,
Hmm.
heavier vehicle, it burns more gas, you're paying more road tax. So that's generally how highways, et cetera, have been funded. And the future is uncertain, which is why you get so much weird press around, this state wants to put a monitor on your vehicle and find out how many miles you're driving every year. And
Yeah.
there's a logic to it because the only other option is you charge everybody a flat higher rate for registration to cover the cost of road improvement. And then if you're not driving very much, if you're retired and you're only driving a few miles a year, you're paying a lot more theoretically for road tax rather than it being a
Yeah.
consumption tax, which is super easy to do when you're buying your fuel that way. But if you're buying your fuel at home, it's not so easy to figure out who needs to pay what. And
No,
and if you
it's
paid, yeah, if you paid a gas tax like thing on supercharging, etc., then you're skewing that cost to apartment dwellers or people without infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, there's no simple way to do it, and like you said, one of the issues that we run into, you and I get a lot of questions from folks, walking down the street almost saying, "Hey, what about this? What about this? I heard this," and one of
Mhm.
those is, "I heard it's 3 times more expensive to own an electric car because just of the registration," and it's like, well, in that one county that they reported on, you're right, that initial cost, but there's so many of these things to break down. I do think, especially here in Washington, just speaking to like where we're at. I pay a higher amount for my registration to cover my essentially non-contributing gas tax or for the road tax.
Mhm.
However, I put a lot of miles on my vehicle,
Yep.
so I'm actually still coming out quite ahead than what I would pay versus a gas tax for the road use. But obviously, the equivalent vehicle of mine in a ICE or even hybrid form is going to be lighter. And so when you look at that impact on the road, I don't
Mhm.
mind paying a basically per weight uh, tax. I think that probably makes the most sense for road is per weight per mile, and that way you really are just
Yep.
effectively capturing what the bigger impact is. But you'd have to overhaul everything and you'd have to be able to do it
Yeah.
all at once. And if you wanted to put that little tracker in that maybe it really did only capture your mileage, no speeds or driving habits or those sorts of things, you'd have to make sure it works in every vehicle and
Yeah.
is read the same in every vehicle. And what happens if you run into a GPS area and that's how it connects. And I know there's a lot of pieces to that, and so it'd be a massive
Mhm.
overhaul. And until that happens, we're probably gonna get some piecemeal solutions.
And you've created another incentive to cheat and alter your odometer, unplug the widget, and,
Yep.
on and on and on. I don't think there's any this is something way above our pay grade to determine what's
Yeah.
what's optimal and what's best, etcetera, and, it's a lot of we don't know because it's not a big percentage of the road-going vehicles at the moment. I
Right.
will say, though, I pat myself on the back because I compensate for, the EVs that we all drive, that are not paying any road tax. I compensate for that by putting road taxed diesel in my tractors and
Hmm.
generators, etc. My Bobcat runs on road taxed diesel because it's just, even though I use about 100 gallons a month or something like that, it's just not enough to try and do an ag gas delivery, which would be more expensive anyway. And then you couldn't fill anything with it. And, now,
Unless
like,
you partner with the neighbors, and then everyone has to
yeah,
get along. And
right. And you'd have to have an ag gas tank and an ag diesel tank. And, I am
not that you
so
haven't looked into
uninterested.
it.
I'm so uninterested. My parents do that, and I'm just like, "That's just so much work." And then it's ugly, ugh, ugh, no thanks, no thanks. Delivery guy,
These are the problems.
yeah, they're delivery
Yeah.
fees too, so it's not simply like, "Oh, you'll cut it by the road tax." No, no, no,
Right.
because you have to use enough to justify the delivery, which may or may not be cheaper than just getting it at the place. And our use, it's basically not. And then you lack the flexibility of being able to go, darn it, my thing is low on gas, I need to drive to the airport, I'll just fill it at home. You
Hmm.
can't do that with the ag gas. Well, you're not supposed to. You obviously, plenty of people do. Don't get caught.
Not recommended.
Not recommended. Don't get caught. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where they would catch you. It's in the Bay Area. I commute from where I live in Santa Clara or Santa Cruz County, in very rural area to a very urban area. Nobody here is going to stop you and stick a dipstick in your Audi or your whatever and go like, "Oh, is there ag diesel in there?" Um, but if you're in Nebraska, it might be more likely.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, but we're talking about fuels, right? So if there is a transition away from pure battery electric vehicle production, my first question to you is, what's that going to do? What kind of effect is that going to have on like the technical progression? Because in my mind,
Mhm.
EVs, battery electric vehicles, are still really young, and there's still a long ways to go in
Oh yeah.
finding more efficient, less mineral intensive, all these different pieces that have already been applied to ICE vehicles and to some extent hybrids. Obviously, those are still, only a couple decades old, where internal combustion's quite a ways out.
Mhm.
Do you think that's really going to hurt the electric vehicle technology progression, or do you think we've made some pretty big steps so far that make it slowing not as critical to their long term future?
That's an interesting question because I would posit that electrification took a rather unusual turn with the tax credit, to some benefit,
Mhm.
government legislation around the world requiring EVs for all, and honestly, hat tip to Tesla for trying to create more accessible EVs to increase volume. Because I would say that the business school direction for this industry would have been for Tesla to have done the Roadster, not the Model 3 or Model Y, not the refresh, etc. Cybertruck, absolutely winner, best-selling $100,000 plus vehicle in North America. Exactly the right thing from a business school perspective, right? Because new
Mhm.
technologies, you start in the luxury segment to
Right.
the customer that's willing to pay for it, build it profitably at lower volume, so you can pay for the R&D and you can evolve and you can improve and you can refine, and then over time you push down into the mass market. And that's how most technological innovations have happened in
Mhm.
America. Flat screen TVs were rich person thing, and then they got better and they got better and they realized, oh, that whole plasma thing, forget the plasma thing, let's go with LCDs, so
Mhm.
much cheaper and better, they don't burn in, etc. If we had instead focused on making plasmas a little bit cheaper, tax incentivize them for all because they're more energy efficient than tube TVs, we could be in a world where we all have crappy plasma TVs that are super heavy and not as energy efficient as what we have now, not as durable as what we have now, etc. Um,
Mhm.
and maybe we would have ended up down a road where we didn't spend as much money investing on the things that we have now. I can't say that that's what's happened with electrification because we do see on this large scale lots of money being spent on innovation for things. But I think that we are still in a world where we're deciding what's the right battery chemistry to have in an EV.
Mhm.
There's lots of variation out there, even within the same company that got lots of different options.
Yeah.
One would say logically it probably is LFP. There's still lots of advantages to NMC batteries, but LFP batteries are more stable. They are less expensive. There are some limitations around them, but it seems like those limitations have been worked on in pretty rapid form.
Yeah.
Um, should motors have brushes? Should they not? That's still unanswered, right?
Mhm.
Should they be induction motors? Should they not? Should we have mechanical all-wheel drive systems? Should we have transmissions? Uh, are four motors the right way to go? Should we just have one? Should we have two? Should we have three?
Mhm.
There's no industry coalescing the same way that we've seen in gasoline vehicles for a lot of these fundamental things. And I don't know whether that would be any different though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's just been such a focus, and there was so much money thrown at it so quickly. And if you look at something like a Tesla Model S, which was right at the forefront, I want to say Nissan Leaf, but Nissan hasn't done a whole lot with the Leaf since. So sorry, Nissan. But you look at that original Model S, and you look at the size of the battery, and you look at its overall efficiency and its overall
Mhm.
performance, and you see how far they've come with that. Not just like, oh yeah, the range is bigger, but they put more bigger batteries in. But you look at its overall efficiency and how much we can get in 0 to 60 times, and all of these components come together. That's just one brand, but we're seeing this kind of across the board. And you talk about LFP. When the Tesla model or the Model S and Model X were out, and then we had things like Jaguar I-Pace and some of these other. I'm just thinking the early
Mhm.
EVs on the road. There was no talk about an LFP battery, and then when it first
No.
came out, there was a, oh no, this is the inferior. This is it's not as energy dense. It's not as powerful. It's not able to get as much power out of it. I bought an LFP Model 3, it's worked perfectly for my situation because I'm not looking for the highest performance.
Got one of those
Um,
Chinese batteries in your Tesla Model
I
3 there.
I do. That was eligible for the federal tax credit in
That's true.
2023, and
Yeah.
in 2024, it wouldn't have been for a minute. It came
Yep.
back, but anyway, it's one of those things where we see this progression. Now we're
Yep.
talking about solid state batteries. We're talking about different motor designs. Like you said, is
Mhm.
it dual motor? Is it single motor with an all wheel drive system, a mechanical all wheel drive? Are we looking at quad motors? I just see that slowing down. Now, obviously, there's been a big leap. It's been so much money thrown
Mhm.
at it so quickly. The other question I have is charging infrastructure, because if EV sales are slowing or not growing the same, which
Yeah,
depending on who you ask, it's the
the
exact same thing.
growth rate is slowing. We should be
Yes,
specific with
yes,
our listeners. EV sales are still on an upward trend. We will sell more EVs.
continuing to rise.
Yeah, EV
Yeah,
sales will be higher in 24 than in 23, but the rate of acceleration is slowing. We just gotta be real clear on that one.
absolutely. My concern then is, are we going to see less infrastructure for
Yeah.
charging from the manufacturers, because they are either having to pivot or choosing to pivot, and kind of take the fallback on internal combustion and hybrid and plug-in hybrid. And then what does that look like? Because I imagine, there are some companies already who have essentially said, we are done with internal combustion um, progress. We're saying, hey, we're going to stop here. They're not
Mhm.
doing the R&D on the next version of their 2 liter, 4 cylinder. But if they're going to start that back up, what are we going to see in the next couple of years? Let's say 4 to 5 years on a very very quick turnaround. Are we going to see some thrown together hybrid plug-in hybrid variants? Are we going to see some more efficient? Is everything getting turbocharged from this point forward? What do you think that main shift will be towards?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would generally say that in Europe and some of those other established markets, I'm pretty sure we will see more hybrids in those markets, and
Hmm.
it's already pretty much a saturated turbo market. Pretty much everything in Europe already has a turbo. I would expect China to not slow down at all. China has
Okay.
been incredibly aggressive at all aspects of zero emissionsifying their economy. And
Hmm.
China is an odd market there in a way because they're a very polluting economy. But as much coal as they still burn, they are shifting their structure of their entire energy market and their entire transportation market to renewable energies and zero emissions profiles so rapidly. And this is a tricky one because there are serious environmental concerns, and I don't want to dismiss that at all. Serious environmental concerns about what is going on in China related to this green energy transition.
Hmm.
Not to say that their graphite production or their lithium refining or anything else is great, but China is improving rapidly. And this is part of why in the federal tax credit scheme that we know now, it's part of why they don't want those critical materials from China. A, it's they don't want them to have a monopoly on it, but B, it's also the realization that if you are refining your lithium in the United States or in Australia or in South Korea, there are environmental watchdogs, there are rules, there are processes, we know where things come from. It's much easier to get a handle on how renewable is that processing. So,
Yeah.
um, but mind you, as far as carbon emissions to the atmosphere, you know, what China is doing is changing the landscape there incredibly rapidly, not just on cars, but the entire landscape. China installs at this point in time more solar capacity in a month than we did the entire year in the United States. So they're really pushing and expanding that footprint to the world. So if you are in Africa or if you're in South America, you're buying a whole lot of Chinese hybrids and plug-in hybrids and solar panels and battery systems, etc. And that is, I would say, an area where the US is getting left behind. And I don't see China changing that because of that huge monumental government push towards radically changing their energy infrastructure.
So, and the advantage of that shift has put them in such a position, right? They've
Mhm.
gone so hard that direction that they got
Mhm.
ahead of a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I would say though in the United States, uh, it's not gonna be it's gonna be business as usual unless we see changes to our fuel economy standards in the US, which don't change very often, and they don't change in drastic measure. They're also, as we've talked about in the past, just sometimes a little stupid. because there are unintended consequences of the legislation, and because
Mhm.
of the way that we are now fighting in today's world, we are now fighting over these things, cannot be addressed in the way that they had been previously, where both parties wanted the legislation. They wanted it for different reasons. So back in
Mhm.
the W. Bush era, there was one party that wanted them for environmental reasons, the other one wanted them for geopolitical energy independence reasons, and they both were like, let's improve our fuel economy standards. But there were some unintended consequences which disincentivized small trucks and disincentivized big sedans and created this SUV truck heavy world mix that we have now in the US, but nobody can fix it now.
Yeah, there's not a lot of meat in the middle to find the best solution forward, especially on something that honestly is so messy
Mhm.
as these current standards. I mean, it's gonna take a lot to shift it, and frankly, I don't think the manufacturers are going to want that to shift because then their whole strategies will have to shift. Their R&D, all their production for the next five,
Mhm.
10 years is going to have to change most likely. So yeah, we would see a lot of change there, which is unfortunate because I don't think it's doing anyone any favors. It's the
Yep.
status quo really limiting not just not just progress, but also options for especially the U.S. Consumer. I would love to see more
Yep.
small trucks. It's just not going to happen.
Just not gonna happen. And
Yeah.
I will say that pretty much every executive at every car company out there, whether they're saying this on the record or not, their bottom line core opinion outside of Elon Musk is, for the love of all things holy, can we just have regulations that are dependable and long term and can be planned
Hmm.
for? Like, okay, you want hybrids? We'll do you hybrids, but we need a plan. And we don't want energy policy to shift so rapidly that we're deep, deep in the rabbit hole of developing this thing, and then the rug's
Hmm.
pulled out from under us. We just invested $13 billion in this plant, as far as Hyundai's concerned, right? They're like, let's not pull the rug out from under this thing because otherwise we wasted $13 billion.
Yeah.
And it, to be perfectly honest, for people out there that are maybe on the fence, it's the unintended consequence problem. It's not just that Hyundai wasted $13 billion, it's that they hired thousands and thousands of employees in Georgia, and that one factory has created over 100,000 jobs in North America, directly and indirectly, that combo of things, because they're moving production to that factory. And those jobs, what's going to happen to them if the accelerator pedal is pulled back from, and
Yeah.
or Hyundai decides, you know what, we're just going to cut our losses, we're going to build the products that we're going to build there, but the new ones, we're just going to put those back in South Korea. And what what does strike me as unfortunate and maybe a little bit short-sighted to some is that I don't think we have seen anybody in Georgia on a state level. Like,
Mm.
the governor has not come out and said,
Right.
Georgia and South Carolina have been the two states that really have received a huge amount of benefit from this
Yeah.
transition,
This big
because
influx.
big influx of money there from Mercedes, from Porsche, from Hyundai, Kia, Genesis. Of course, South Carolina has Volvo and BMW there, etc.,
Mm.
putting massive amounts of money into retooling and building new factories and battery plants, etc. But we don't see those governors going, "Hey guys, what's the plan to keep the jobs?" Like,
No.
we would like people to have jobs here. What's the plan to keep them if these policy changes swing erratically and they can't be depended on?
Right, and I think even if it's not, they shutter the doors and everyone loses their job tomorrow. Obviously, we're not hoping for any of that. The question is, would you continue to invest in a market that things are so unstable? Especially, I mean,
Mhm.
if you're trying to make this commitment and then the rug gets pulled out, you don't want to make that commitment anymore. Even if you stick to what you had, I look at hurting future development, future industry, and it ends up being the consumer who suffers because not only are they losing their job uh, to and they're then not able to afford their next vehicle, which hurts the auto industry. But obviously, the outsourcing of these vehicles, the tariffs coming in potentially, and then the increased costs and all these things, it puts everyone in a tough spot. And we're already looking, Last year we took a close look at all the affordable vehicles. We'll be doing the same thing this year. Our
Mhm.
best affordable vehicle in the country, and that list gets smaller and smaller every single year, and that is a shame. I mean, from an auto enthusiast standpoint, the fact that you can't get out of college and have your first, let's say degree specific job, and you're getting paid, and you go, I want to go buy a new car, and you're just really stuck without options.
Yep. It is very unfortunate, and cars are getting more expensive.
Hmm.
You know, I will say that there is a segment of the auto enthusiast community out there that has blamed electrification for the unaffordability in cars, and I would say that's the wrong place to place blame. I honestly blame both the car buying public. There's a solid amount of blame to be placed on the people that are not buying cars. Let's be frank,
Hmm.
and also on auto manufacturers and just corporate decisions. And let's be frank, corporate greed. There were decisions, especially at the big three car companies. We're seeing Stellantis is in the news a lot right now. The conglomerate that owns the Chrysler portfolio of companies, but Ford and GM did basically the same thing. Pandemic rolls around, parts availability was difficult, production was difficult, so they said, "Ah, the solution here is we'll make fewer cars. We will
Hmm.
not discount them. We will make higher trims, ever higher trims, and we'll keep raising that price up. And who cares about volume? We'll make it up in the pricing." And for those that think that Stellantis is the canary in the coal mine, that they're going to implode, and Jeep and Ram and whatever, they're going to implode, that's not going to happen because they have billions and billions of dollars in the bank. Stellantis is one of the most profitable car companies in the world, was in 2023. We don't know what 2024 will be. The
Hmm.
real problem, though, was volume dropped through the floor. There's no such thing as an affordable Jeep anymore. There's no such thing as an affordable anything from that car company. They really
Hmm.
pegged their flag to expensive Jeeps, ever more expensive Ram trucks, and their dealers are now going, "Oh dear, like we do need the volume." Stellantis is sitting pretty because they had lower volume, higher margins, record profits, earth-shattering
Yeah.
profits, to be perfectly honest. Um, but then also on the same side, we've talked about this before, but customers out there don't buy the cheap car.
Right.
The Nissan Kicks is not flying off the shelves.
No, and they look at what else is available. Obviously, we are not a country. We're not a consumer base. We don't mind going into debt. We don't mind having a payment. Um, long lost are the days of the ever available, ever visible Chrysler 200. Right. That was
Mhm.
the affordable option. Now we're looking at a highly incentivized Fiat 500e, and obviously that's going to be a pretty small market who purchases one of those. Um, it's a shame, and I
Yeah.
but to your point, why would the manufacturer quit doing it if we kept going? And if even if Jeep sees their sales drop to the floor and now they need to adjust, we're not talking about them suddenly taking losses. We're just talking about them making less
Mhm.
profit. We're not talking about this company is
Yeah.
going under. They're just going to have to tighten the belt a little bit, and it's not anywhere near as much as we see other manufacturers truly having to tighten the belt to stay, alive and relevant. They're just saying, "Oh, okay, well, we can dial back this percentage and still be very, very comfortable." So
Yep.
yeah, and you look at the products that have come out from a company like Jeep, not just to pick on them because there are tons of them, but when we had the Grand Cherokee and you could get a very, very, very expensive Grand Cherokee and a Grand Cherokee L, the next product out was the Wagoneer, which is
Mhm.
not. I mean, some might disagree, but it's not entirely different than that Grand Cherokee. It's just a heck of a lot more expensive when you go kind of trim for trim, and that's sold just fine as well. So that's kind of what
Yep.
we run into.
Exactly. And,
Hmm.
customers out there, when Ford killed the Fiesta and said our solution for the Fiesta's existence or lack of existence is something much more expensive,
Hmm.
no customer squawked. They just started buying the more expensive thing.
Yep.
Nissan's not selling a lot of Versas, and Nissan was pretty upfront in saying that the reason the Versa is being killed off is because no one's buying it. I mean, if people were still buying hundreds of thousands of them a year, they'd still be selling.
Yeah.
Uh,
Even on a very small margin, it still makes
mhm.
sense.
Yeah. Kia said that, Soul sales are slipping. Why is no one buying a Soul? Who knows?
Mhm.
But there's definitely a lack of customer interest in buying the affordable set of vehicles. We do have a few
Mhm.
rays of hope. The Chevy Trax is doing relatively well. The
Mhm.
Trailblazer's doing okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, what world do we live in where we have the constant drumbeat of everything is too expensive, and yet the more expensive the model in the lineup, the better it sells. Like that's an economic problem where the customer is either to blame or I don't know exactly how to phrase that. Like are we not marketing properly? But again, it's if it's true customer interest, marketing shouldn't be required for the customer to go, I'm looking for a $25,000 new set of wheels. That's the $25,000 new set of wheels.
If anything, I think it might be a short-term outlook. I mean, I think obviously we're getting profits now. This is what makes sense now. But I think what companies are losing is their next buyer, right? So
Mhm.
I imagine, and I can be wrong, but I imagine a Chevy Trax owner is likely to say in the Chevy family. And so you as a company have greater control, greater influence on those buying decisions if you put out a affordable product that somebody can get into and get excited about and stay excited, so that when it's time to replace their tracks, they go back to the Chevy dealer and they say, "Ooh, what else can I get?" And their life has changed, and now they're looking at something like an Equinox or a
Mhm.
Traverse. You know, they
Yeah.
they go back to this manufacturer. Obviously, if you're a car company that doesn't have a very affordable option, then your ownership base kind of gets smaller and smaller. You know, what's the average uh, buying age of someone who's buying a Jeep these days? Because I imagine it's going to be higher
It's
than
old.
someone who's buying a Subaru, and it's just because of affordability, you know? So I think
Well,
I think I think short term you're finding gains, but long term you might suffer for it. And if anything else, that's my argument to put out. Even if it's even if it's the loss leader, it
mhm.
still gets people in the door. Put out a fun, interesting, affordable product so people can buy into it. So they're buying into your portfolio.
Yeah, I will say demographically, there's little daylight between the average Jeep customer or the average Subaru customer, and little daylight, strangely little daylight between the average like Nissan customer and the average
Mm.
Porsche customer. New cars have by and large become the thing for the upper middle class and the wealthy. And
Yeah.
the actual middle class and the working class, whatever we want, class seems so bad. I mean, like, we'll just say high income earner, they buy new
Lower
cars.
income
The
earner. Yeah.
mid-income earner and the average people, which is certainly a way to describe, regular people, right? This
Mhm.
sounds so horrible. Sorry, guys. I don't
And by the
know.
way, we're regular people,
We're
so
just
just
regular people
let's
here.
let's be real
But
clear.
you know, we're just left to buy used cars.
Yeah.
It is very, Les Miserables, like the crumbs, the poor are left for the crumbs. Oh, the new ones are for the wealthy people,
Mhm.
and used is for us. That is definitely a concern of mine going forward. I don't foresee a world where we will ever see the same kind of auto sales we had decades ago. Even though America, our population is growing and growing, we're not going to see those kinds of automotive sales because we just keep having this narrowing set of demographics that are buying cars. Fortunately, cars are lasting longer than ever, which
Yeah.
maybe is part of this. And that may be part of the reason that a smaller percentage of Americans buy a new car every year as they're lasting longer and longer. Um, but I would argue that our somewhat protectionist policies around new entrants to the American market are partially to blame. There's why can't we get the cheap Indian cars in America or the cheap Chinese cars
Mhm.
in America or the cheap wherever cars in America? There are barriers to entry from these manufacturers, not to mention tariffs. Obviously, that's going to be a problem for American manufacturing if you had a cheap car from China being sold in the US. But as we've talked about before, it also means that someone that earns minimum wage, somewhere might be able to afford a new reliable car to get them to their job and keep that job reliably if
Yeah.
they could get an honest to goodness $15,000 set of wheels.
I mean, the last you and I traveled to go see a lot of vehicles, and I would say of the last 5 or 6, the majority of them have been, a lot closer to $100,000 than I would ever pay for my own personal vehicle. And
Mhm.
when I went and purchased a car, you and I end up in different generations technically.
I blame
Um,
the millennials, it's okay.
Sure, fair enough. But when I bought a car, I bought essentially the cheapest reasonable electric vehicle that I could buy. And it was, very, I didn't go for options. I didn't go for larger batteries. I didn't go for performance. And so when you look at what I paid for my car, especially the tax credit coming in, it was quite a bit less than the average transactional price for a vehicle.
Mhm.
The whole point there is that if I didn't do that, my options get much more limited. Obviously, my experience with the vehicle can be a lot more up in the air because if I'm buying used, it depends on how well it's taken care of, how it's maintained or wasn't maintained. We're looking at these things going, I'm the millennial, I'm the next generation of car buyer, and I'm looking at these cars going, why? What am I going to spend this money on? And there's not a lot of money I'm willing to spend on it, even if it's an incredible vehicle. I'm not as committed to it, and I tend to be
Mhm.
what people would consider a car enthusiast, and I go, "Yeah, but if I look for the dollar, here's what I can go get used," and that puts 0 money in manufacturers' pockets, unless maybe it's a certified pre-owned and it's financed through them, that'd be
Mhm.
something. But yeah, it's a big changing market, and as we've also discussed, the auto enthusiast, by and large, tends to not purchase a lot of new vehicles. They buy a used vehicle, they spend a lot of money on that vehicle, and they keep it for as long as they can. They're not the one buying new cars.
Exactly. And we will end this episode apologizing for our divergence into politics, but hey, it happens now and then, by also saying I totally blame the millennials because they're the audience that's like, I want everything. That's what my generation thinks of the younger
Mm,
people. They're like, I don't want
mhm,
to work hard. I just want everything. I want
mhm.
my Wagoneer with all the bells and whistles and huge screens, and then I'm going to be super sad that I can't afford a new car.
Yeah, and I'll be really upset when I have to replace all those screens. What is that about? I want my
Mhm.
cake and I want to eat it too. It's funny. Everyone
Millennials
says,
should be
"Here's what
happy
this."
with an old Oldsmobile like we were with they were happy it had AM, you know? Airbags are for wimps.
The vehicle I got to drive when I was in high school had no airbags, no power, and I still very much enjoyed it. So, hashtag not all millennials. But you know what? You know who raised the millennials? Not themselves. So just if you're pointing a
Oh.
finger, there's a couple others pointing the other direction.
Hey, my generation was the latchkey generation. We raised ourselves like some sort of feral animal in the woods.
And
My
look how
mom
well that
my
turned
mom
out.
would be very offended by that statement. Hopefully she's not listening. Anyway sound
Hopefully
off
you're
and let us
listening and you
know.
tell your friends to tune in.
Yeah, sound off and let us know what you think about this, and are millennials to blame for all of our car woes? I vote
We'll
yes. You can
we'll find
sound
out our
off by
audience here.
you can sound off by calling 669-842-1947 and leave us a voice message. Maybe you will be played at the end of the next episode, so you can tell us all how wrong or right we were. You may also email us a voice memo file to hey@autobuyersguide.com. That's HEY at autobuyersguide.com. Or better yet, you could even use one of those fancy schmancy file sending services and you could
Mhm.
video yourself with one of them newfangled smartphones, right like that. Well,
Acting
more
like a
like that, but
millennial.
something like that. And then you could send us that file and we could see your beautiful faces on the YouTube version of this podcast. See all of you later.